Welcome to WCAT TV and Radio. I'm Kiki Latimer, and I'm your host for the Catholic Bookworm. And I have with me today author Suzanne Mulrain. Welcome.
Thank you, Kiki.
And Suzanne has written chapters in the book Clerical Sexual Misconduct, and we've had several other interviews from authors in these books. And so I just would like to start with a recognition that for many people, this is an extremely painful topic, a difficult topic. For many people, it has touched them either personally, the abuse scandal in the church, or has caused difficulties with their faith or their family life connected to it. So I just want to acknowledge that. I was very indirectly, but personally affected by the scandal. And so I understand at least a small amount of the pain that many people associate with this. The book Sexual Clerical Misconduct have been an amazing attempt to both understand how the problem came about in the first place, certainly focusing in not just on the culture and the sexual revolution, but problematic seminary formation. And so the first book focused primarily on the 80% of the abuse that was directed towards men and young boys. And the second book is focusing more on the sexual abuse, the 20% that took place directed towards young girls and women. And so we're looking at, in both books, is looking at changing formation of seminarians, finding ways to weed out people that shouldn't become priests. And for those who should become priests, giving them a stronger foundation with which to live out their vocation, which is clearly, we see that needed both in the celibate life and in marriage. So Suzanne, welcome.
Thank you.
This morning. Could you start us off with a brief prayer?
I would be happy to do that. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord Jesus, we invite your holy presence to join us in this conversation. We praise and we thank you for your love, and we praise and we thank you for your teachings that guide us. I ask you to bless and anoint our words and prepare our hearts to hear them. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. And we ask you to bless especially all Kiki's listeners.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Suzanne, let's start off. Why don't you tell us how you got yourself into this?
Okay, very good.
We get into these difficult situations.
Yes. How did I get into this? So, I began to tell you a little bit yesterday about how Jane came about this first book. And I reflected on it later last night. And I think this is an important part that I didn't mention. It all began for Jane, the editor, when she was working in the Vatican and was studying, I guess, the first big address by the Holy Father of the crisis in the church in Chile. And in his talk, he put out what's called a call. And it's important to understand how important a call is. And those who have ears to hear it will hear the call. And so he put out a call, which came in the form of, I wish that the academics would make a study upon this and see what they come up with. And that's how she responded to that call.
Which Holy Father was this?
That was Pope Francis.
Okay.
Pope Francis. And so then she went about and said, I would like to do this. I would like to gather a group of experts, and they will meet at her, where she was working at that time at the Ave Maria Law School. And they met there, and I attended that group, and it was a really wonderful conference. And that was the beginning of that book. And then the conference details then became a book, like their presentations, and then they were formalized into a book. And that was this book, the first one.
Did you have a copy?
Clerical Sexual Misconduct, an interdisciplinary conversation. An interdisciplinary analysis. And the interdisciplinary analysis was so interesting because it covered so many areas: sociology, theology, several other areas that you could really take a deep dive on this. And then she paired two authors to share in writing each chapter.
Thank you. And how did you get involved with this?
Well, I got involved because Jane invited me to come to the conference in Florida and just to be involved and help. And so when we were leaving, she said, I am in a women's group called Catholic Women's Forum. And we had created a little pocket group in that group with some of the women that worked at seminaries in the U.S. And so she said, why don't you ask the women that you're in the group with if they would like to write a chapter? And I said, okay. And so I said, would you like to write a chapter to several? And they said, no, we don't think that we have the time right now to do that. So I said to Jane, oh, they can't. And she said, well, why don't you and Robert Fastiggi put one together? So that's what we did. And we worked together, and he's such a lovely professor, lovely man, very faithful man. And he is an absolute pleasure to work with.
It's really an exciting thing because, I mean, a lot of people may not realize that a lot of women work at seminaries and teach seminarians and are part of, therefore, the seminarians' formation.
Absolutely.
You know, I was blessed to work at Holy Apostles for 6 years and interact with many seminarians.
See, it's good for them too.
Yeah. And women have a different perspective on relationships than men do. And so there's the ability, I mean, when a man is ordained and he's put into a parish, he has to work with women and men, women, and children, you know.
Absolutely.
And we all know many priests who are simply, you know, they are good men, holy men, but incapable of interacting with their parishioners. I've known many priests, they don't like women, they don't like seminary, I mean, they don't like children, they don't deal well with families, and we all know that when we find that, it's not a good thing in the church and parish. And so recently I've come across this quote, I can't remember exactly where it came from, but if a man is not capable of marriage, then he shouldn't be ordained, because as John Paul II said in Theology of the Body, these are two sides of the same coin: marriage and the celibate priesthood and the religious life for women. Those are two sides of the same coin. And so you need to have that holiness, that's that ability to have relationships. If you're going into the priesthood because you're running from marriage and you're going to hide out from men, women, and children, then there's a problem. If you just want a relationship with God, but not the sheep, you know.
That's right. And that's not exactly. If you just want your relationship with God, but not the sheep, then, and even your brother priests, then that is so limiting how are you sharing yourself that way? Right. Because we're called to community.
Yeah. And women are so relationship oriented compared to men to begin with. That's seeing when women are in the seminary teaching and involved in formation, they can weed out people that, you know, are afraid of women, don't enter into proper friendship relationships with each other and with you as their professor and friend. You spend a lot of time, like breakfast, lunch, and dinner in the cafeteria with these guys. And at Holy Apostles, we were really blessed to have half the population were religious sisters, nuns from Vietnam. So they had to interact with young women, beautiful young women, I must say, just lovely young women. And so you could tell whether, women could very quickly pick up on this young gentleman loves God, but he's not comfortable in relationships.
You have hit on such a key point. That actually happened at our seminary. And the priest that I wrote the chapter with in the second book, A Foundational Conversation, which was shared by a man and a woman, each chapter written. So the dean of my school, of the department, and he and I were in the office together. He said so well, because we did an interview for another group that I belonged to, and he and I did it together. And the woman asked him a similar question to what you just said. And he said, we actually welcome very much the women's observations and comments to us, because as a whole, we're all helping him develop into his priesthood, into his holy life, and into this personality of being open to all. And he said, Monsignor Michael McGee, he said, I believe that the women have an even sharper instinct to pick up when things are not right in the personality or in the relationship between the man and the woman. And he said, we welcome it. So I thought that was really great.
It's important.
Yes,
important.
Because he said women can pick up, this is what he said exactly. They can pick up the particulars that we might miss. And so Monsignor oversaw a vast formation program, which just gets stronger every year because of all these situations, which led into better formation at the seminary level. And so they meet frequently. They have forms that they fill out. They take notes. I mean, it's all for their good. And so they're constantly—
the good of the church.
It's all the good of the church, the good of the church, our good, the good of the seminarian, and the good of the seminary. And so our seminary, St. Charles Borromeo Seminary in Philadelphia, was the third seminary founded in the United States. So it was founded in 1832, and it is in a nice area of Philadelphia, right across from St. Joe's University, has a very nice campus, and which they're actually moving from to move to another new campus, but a smaller one. But the point is that we have many bishops that send their many bishops that send their young seminarians to our seminary for formation. So we have several bishops, several dioceses that send to us because of the quality of our program, the size of our program, the mastery of the formators, the professors, and we really, I think we do a really good job at that. I mean, I'm not one of the formators, but I can attest that my friend Monsignor Michael McGee is a leader there, and they're all very good priests.
So your chapter in volume 2 was called Affective Maturity and Its Importance for Seminary Formation. And yes. Affective maturity, from what I understand, was a term coined by St. John Paul II.
Yes.
I don't know where it was coined, whether it was in Theology of the Body or another document, but he gets credit for the concept of and the term affective maturity. Yes. And a lot of people think when they hear affective, they just think the emotional life. You have to have your, emotional maturity. But the term is much more than that. Do you want to talk to us? Start with a good absolutely. Definition of what we mean, because we want to really dig into what this means for seminary formation today, which wasn't done in the past. In the past, it was like if you came in and you love God and you said you wanted to serve his people, like, we'll take you. but now we want this thing, and find ways to determine if a person has it, or if they're capable of it, can we create it in them, help them get there? So it's not just that you have to have it when you walk in the door, but are you capable of learning it and being it? So let's
Yes.
talk about that term.
Very good, because this is a very key area of especially within the crisis, within the seminaries. It's a very key area of bettering the situation of the crisis. And the person, the best way to describe it is that it is a person in full communion with themselves. So their intellect, their mind, their heart, their emotions, their personality, everything is in line. Everything is measured in line. And there is nothing that's out of bounds or out of work, or it's just a person who is virtuous, who's practicing the virtues, who's praying. It's a person who is really in tune with themselves and in line with who they are as a child of God. Mm-hmm. And the person, again, to quote Monsignor McGee, my co-author, he said, the reason that we chose affective maturity for our topic of our chapter was because he, of course, as a formator, has observed many of these seminarians going through the program, and then you have one or two that later in their ordination, they find out that something went wrong and something happened. And so he said, I am convinced that with affective maturity, we will be able, all right, let's say this. So as some seminarians are going through the seminary, you might have one or two that might be able to jump through all the hoops, which is how he said it. And as they're jumping through the hoops, they're passing all the evaluations and the tests, and so they're not catching something. And then when they get out, so he said, I believe that this is the answer, affective maturity. So the more we focus on this, and John Paul II actually came himself to our school, and let me read what he said here. He encouraged the seminarians to be disciplined, to embrace celibate chastity, to seek intellectual formation in human sciences and in sacred sciences, to thrive in human formation, and to prepare for a life of consecrated service in the image of Jesus Christ, and self-mastery through human formation, to foster a solid maturity of personality and traits of character. So it's more about, it's not just about the personality, it's about the character, the integrity, the whole person.
Right. I remember there was something in I believe it was in your chapter that said John Paul didn't want just the idea of what do we do, but how to be. This inner being of a person of virtue and this ability of self-gift. I mean, Bishop Barron talks a lot about being able to give yourself to others, to give your life away and thereby find it.
Right.
But also a sense of what we call authentic freedom.
Absolutely.
Sometimes, that freedom of knowing who you are to begin with, knowing your limitations. I talk to my students, I'm doing some homeschooling with a group of kids, and the idea that freedom always has a boundary.
Yes.
I was listening to a talk once about the Garden of Eden, and someone said, there was almost perfect freedom in the garden except for the tree in the middle. And I said, oh no, there was perfect freedom in the garden.
That's right.
Because freedom always has a boundary. Freedom always has a limit. If you can do anything you want in the garden, and then that's license,
Absolutely
that's not freedom. And so this understanding of our own authentic freedom, and that the seminarian has to understand a concept of authentic freedom, of who he is within himself, his relationship with God. And obviously that entails the virtues. I mean, prudence and humility. And so that has to do with who you are,
That's right.
not what you do.
That's right.
So John Paul II was trying to get us away from the idea of, to be a good person, you do. It's rather, who are you on the inside to start with? In my ethics class, we used to call it conduct and character.
Very good.
Being a good person involves conduct, surely.
Absolutely.
But it starts with character. Who are you on the inside? Because you might be doing good for the wrong reasons.
That's right.
You might not steal the wallet because you don't want to get caught, but that's not a good reason
That's
not
right.
to steal the wallet.
That's
So
right.
when you talk about seminarians being able to jump through hoops in the past, they could do all the right things. Their conduct could be perfect. While the inner character is still flawed. And of course, that comes out years later.
Right.
I had a young seminarian who was a good friend of mine it's been about 15 years ago. And he said, basically we were old friends for a long time, not in the seminary that I was at. But over coffee, he basically said, I think his family really wanted him to be a priest, and he had been in and out of the seminary. And then he said, I think I'm finally going to get ordained. I want to have sex, but I think I can stuff it down in a way.
No.
And I said, yeah, for maybe about 5 years while the honeymoon of ordination lasts. I said, but if that's your attitude, that you really want to have be in a sexual relationship, it's not going to last forever.
That's right.
I said, at some point, you're just going to go 3 towns over and sleep with somebody, and that's going to hurt yourself and the church and everybody. And a year later, he got married.
Oh my!
And has a whole crew of kids now, and he's happily married.
Wow.
And he's, I believe he's working in a Catholic school as a principal, and he's a wonderful, wonderful father and husband. So again, he thought he could just push his conduct into a box. But his inner being was saying no to that idea, that wasn't who he was.
That's right. And it is a free will choice that you make when you enter the seminary you give yourself to God for a life of a priest. And John Paul II certainly lived that life, didn't he? I mean, he just was filled with affective maturity. He lived for all. He lived for others. He lived for God, and so joyfully.
Yes. I had a list here from your book where it talked about the choice of celibacy must be truly free. In order for it to be truly free, one needs to understand the sexual gift, which I think that was something in the past that, we don't even talk about the sexual gift. Sure. Understand marriage and have a lot of sexual education, be aware. Again, it's this idea, your celibacy is you're giving up marriage for the sake of the kingdom.
Yes.
But if you don't understand what you're giving up, then you're not really giving it up.
Yes.
So this understanding of yourself as a sexual person, and then of course, psychological freedom, no addictions.
Definitely.
A lot of the book, other chapters talk about that a lot of our seminarians are coming in with pornography as an addiction, even as a minor addiction.
All right. I'm so glad you brought that up, because
which is a huge issue with affective maturity. Is
definitely
affective maturity implies that you don't have addictions. So you got to weed those out, whether
absolutely. I mean, that's a big flaw. So I'd like to address the first thing you said about the education in sexuality, the education in marriage and family. That I know. See, I didn't teach in the seminary. I taught in the school for the laity where I attended. I attended that school. Got my master's in theology, and I know in the seminary that they bring in a couple and the couple comes in and they share information about family life and things about marriage and their life as a married couple, so that they understand married life, because they're going to be ministering to married couples. To speak with this couple, and also a natural family planning specialist. And they come in because they want them very well educated in family life, and especially in natural family planning, for those who would want to space children. And then they're well versed in after these trainings, and then they can move into more comfortable dialogue conversations as in their priesthood in the parish. And so they do meet several needs that way in terms of preparation for the seminarians. Well, of course, they're coming from family life, so they understand it, but now they're being prepared as ministers to be able to tend to family situations. And another John Paul II quote, so wonderful. He was taught so many things by Bishop Wisniewski and in Poland, and when he became a priest and a bishop, he told the priests in his rectory that we must always leave the door open and the light on. And there was a story where they had a married couple that just fought all the time. And John Paul II told the priest, he said, bring them in. And he said, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to tell them, this young priest. He said, no, you're just going to sit with them. You're going to let them work it out, and you sit with them. And your presence with God is sitting there with them in the midst of their trouble. And they came in and they quailed in front of him, and then they reconciled, and then they left. And they had resolved their issue, but he said, you don't have to say anything. You just sit there and be present to them. And that's what he was about. He was just being present and loving us in all of our situations where we are.
Right. I had an interview last week with Dr. Peter Klepanis, who has a chapter in the second book. And one of the things he mentioned, and I think I'll mention it again here, was that sometimes we assume that the priests, the seminarians, all come from wonderful, holy families, that they come from some kind of perfect family, but often they don't. Many of them have come out of divorced families or abusive families. And he said, especially with, some Catholic families where the son is being pushed to be a priest, there's alcoholism in the family, or some other kind of abuse, but nobody can talk about it because they're the perfect Catholic family. And so these seminarians come in with this baggage.
Sure.
And to assume that they don't have that baggage is unfair to them. It's unfair to us in the church. But it's unfair to them as well, because they've got this hidden baggage that keeps them from having affective maturity.
Absolutely.
Those issues need to be dealt with right off the bat. Like, let's find out what your baggage is and whether we can educate you to get rid of it, or whether you'd be better off somewhere else.
So
the church.
You're absolutely right. So Dr. Klepanis is actually, I'm local to where his office is. So he was a very great neighbor for the seminary. Now, our seminary, St. Charles Borromeo Seminary, has a full-time psychologist on staff, and they do counseling, and they have counseling for the seminarians, and the door is always available. And our new rector, Father Keith Chilinsky, was the full-time psychologist, and then he became the rector. And so now we have another young man that just joined the staff. And he's wonderful. And the seminarians are very comfortable. They go in and out the door all day, and they have this opportunity. It's an open opportunity to come and talk. They can set an appointment, but it's an opportunity where they're able to really process all these situations that they've brought into the seminary with them. And so it's very healthy. And I would also like to say, I believe I'm in our paragraph, or our chapter rather, in one of the books, we talked about the psychological testing that goes on. And so it was the most recent revision was actually analyzed, the testing itself was actually analyzed by Dr. Peter Klopanis. And he said that he would recommend, his recommendation was absolutely, when a recommendation is made, it should not just be sent to the seminary, that this should be interpreted only by a psychologist, and perhaps the psychologist that did it in the local seminary, whatever state that may be in our country, because it's a psychological, technical language, and perhaps even the interpretation might be missed by some of the priests on staff or even the rector. So his advice, because I know Monsignor and I did talk about that for our chapter, that his suggestion was it has to be interpreted by a psychologist directly to the rector, and perhaps even to the bishop, because they apply to the bishop to get into the seminary. And then that's when they start to go through the psychological process. So I believe that that's really become even more fine-tuned. Again, another improvement in terms of the situation. But yes, the family origin sometimes can be problematic if they have unresolved issues, and they do bring that in. And so it's not just I would say, it's not just the priests who are monitoring so closely the seminarians, that I believe they help each other and they look out for each other, and they may talk to the priests about it. But in my role, which I just retired from at the seminary, I just retired, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And the Monsignor McGee just had a steady stream of seminarians that would come in. He'd go to his lectures, and then he'd come back to the office and he'd be meeting with seminarians. And he always had a great attitude when they would come in. You know, he'd say, "Are you ready to be formed, young man?" And he would say, "Oh, yes, I am, Monsignor." And then they would go in, and he just had a wonderful way with them. And he noticed that the priests actually noticed that they really enjoyed having lunch with the priests as well, and dialoguing. And so then they started having lunch with them if they could, if they didn't have a meeting or something, and they would join them for lunch and dialogue. And it was just really wonderful. So I want to also talk about the pornography. So the pornography is just really devastating, just absolutely devastating to anyone.
Devastating across the board for
that's what I'm about to say. Exactly, across the board. Now, I'm not saying it's rampant in our seminary. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's rampant. It's like a.
Well, it's accessible. It's right
Yeah.
there. It's accessible. It's affordable. What did Peter say? Accessible, affordable, accepted, and highly aggressively addictive.
Highly aggressive,
especially for men.
So destructive.
Men are much more visual than women are.
So destructive. So the reason I brought that up is because this is fascinating to me. So a couple of years ago, we wanted to create a program of philosophy. So, all right. So I worked in the School of Theological Studies, and that was for the laity, for religious sisters, and for priests who wanted to come back and get their master's degree. So we created a program which really took off. It was really fantastic. And it was called the Institute for Christian Formation. And so we just went through the entire catechism. but we brought in a new teacher. Like I might bring in you to come and speak one class. And so every class, it was every Thursday night for 8 weeks, excuse me, and every class had a different teacher, each part of the catechism. And it was really wonderful, really successful because the people came in and just loved it because they hadn't really heard it taught that way before. So my point in bringing this up was one of the programs that we were building was an online philosophy program. And we were building that for the sisters, for the religious sisters. And I was visited by, there are sisters in our community at the seminary that had the leadership of the religious sisters at USCCB. So this one sister was basically the religious sister's office. And so she said she had a call from, it was a really interesting story. She had a call from the counselor, I believe it was the counselor the formators of the religious sisters in several orders. And she said, we have a concern. We see there's some young sisters coming in that have not had Catholic philosophy. And so they are and they're working in pastoral settings, whether it was hospitals, schools, churches, various areas. And in the pastoral settings, they were commiserating with the people that, well, I'm just going to give you an example. This wasn't one I was told, but let's say, we don't have enough money. We can't have another child or something along the lines that would be against Catholic teaching. So they thought, instead of trying to, help them understand through philosophy, they didn't have philosophy background. So they were kind of commiserating with the people, and the formators were seeing this. And so they had a concern about it, and they said, we have to do this education so that they understand. And so that's what we were setting out to do. So as they asked me to come and present to all the orders, the CMSWR, of all the leaders. And so I just presented very briefly at their conference in St. Louis about this. We're going to be building this program. And they were really intrigued about it. And they, so during the conference, we had I'm going right to your point here about pornography. So we had a conference and a psychologist came in, and it was little breakout groups. And I was in the conference, and I was really stunned when I heard them say that this psychologist was speaking about some sisters that have become addicted, whether they were just novices, or I'm not really sure, or they came in with it. It was probably more like that. They came in with it, had been exposed to it, and they were working very hard to help them through the psychologist to understand. And that was something I never imagined, really. But it is a very insidious addiction. It's just lures everybody in, I guess. And that's why we have such a prevalence of problems with it.
Well, Dr. Peter Kopanis talked about how it's often associated with our wounds. All addictions generally are, it's used to medicate a wound, whether you use alcohol or drugs or sex, it's a way to, you're bored and you're anxious and you're hurting. So you turn towards one of those things. And right now, the cheapest thing to turn to, drugs are expensive, alcohol is expensive, but porn is cheap. So it's a cheap way to medicate yourself,
right,
from whatever pain is going on in your life. Whatever kind, boredom can be painful, anxiety can be painful. So if you haven't learned how to deal with those things through virtue, then you're kind of open to addiction. You're open to it.
Absolutely. And again, that's a very strong pull. And so if you have any addictions, like you said, like any weaknesses in addictions, whether it's, you don't want to get up and go to work that day or whatever it might be, you just get distracted.
And I think also that we're a very, even though we're Catholics, we're living in a very Protestant-minded culture. And there's that concept, I think, that runs in Protestantism of pull yourself up by your own bootstraps.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of people, when they get into addictions, they feel like, well, I got myself into this, I can get myself out of it by my own free will, by the strength of will. And that's just usually not possible. It takes learning virtue, it takes grace, it takes going to confession again and again and again to work your way out. Just the sincere desire by itself, as Dr. Peter Kopana says, that's a good start. That you start with, I would like to get out of this addiction, but it takes hard work to get out of it. And it takes an awareness of grace,
Absolutely.
and the reception of constant grace.
Mm-hmm.
To keep yourself going.
That's why
addiction.
And you're absolutely right. That is his specialty. He is renowned for helping people with this addiction.
And so recognizing the need to look at this in seminary formation, when I told Peter, when I first got to Holy Apostles, and for those people who may not have seen that interview, I'll repeat it here. I kind of thought that seminarians sort of came through the door as asexual or non-sexual beings when I first got there. And then I realized, no, these are just regular guys that are, being called hopefully to the priesthood, and they have to work out chastity and celibacy and chastity, but just like we have to in the married state or the single state. We don't leave our sexuality at the door. We are male, female, we are sexual beings. And so we're all called to chastity. We're all called to chastity. But chastity doesn't mean that you become an asexual being. It means that you live out your sexuality proper to your state in life.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have to learn how to do that. Just as in a marriage, you have to learn how to do that, but it's different.
Mm-hmm.
Or a single life or the religious life. So it's really a life of virtue.
Mm-hmm.
And virtue is learned. We're not born virtuous,
That is absolutely right. Oh, wait.
We're losing you there. There we go.
Wait a second. Wait, what happened here? Oh dear. There we are.
Right,
my other screen popped up.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So virtue is learned through grace. We don't pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. We cooperate with God's grace for our station in life. And so that seminary formation has to include that. I think in the past, it was more assumed if a man said he wanted to be a priest and he felt called to the priesthood, it was assumed that all the ducks were in a row. But we've learned through the scandal, sadly, that for many people, the ducks weren't in a row, that either ordination should not have happened, or if it should have happened, there needed to be much more formation and education before it happened.
Good point. That's a good point.
And some problems can be worked out, it's definitely.
So I just want to say there's a philosophy. He's actually on sabbatical right now. Lucas, he started a program. He's one of the teachers at the seminary, young man, and he just got married, and he started a program called, I think it's called Young Scholars. And he approached, which I think was really a brilliant idea. And he approached the rector if he would be given permission to do this in the summer. Now, of course, he wanted to bring young high school men. I think they were juniors, maybe sophomores and juniors, I think. And he would bring them on the campus. So, of course, you had to get permission because it would be a special opportunity. And the campus was empty in the summer of the seminarians. And so they would come and live on the campus, take classes with under Lucas and some other seminary professors. But his intent was to teach them philosophy and teach them other classes, biblical studies and things like that, but also to be drawn in to the setting of the seminary, the peace, the beauty, the churches, the chapels, and just to be hopefully foster vocations. And I believe that we did get one or maybe even two out of it, or that are planning to come. And so that was a really successful program. And I thought, well, good for him, because he had this desire in his heart to do it, to teach, and then to also encourage them to consider the seminary life. And so, I can tell you that there is so much joy. It's just so, when I see them and talk to them, they're all such wonderful young men. And yes, everybody has their days, their difficult days and things like that, but they're surrounded by people who really care about them. And so I just wanted to tell you a little bit about why I retired. So in the beginning, I should have told you about myself, which I have 3 children. 3 wonderful children. Ryan, he's married to Christina. Jordan, he's married to Katie, and they have 3 beautiful grandchildren for us. And my daughter, Molly, and she's my youngest, and she's getting married in November in London. She lives in London, and she's actually with me now, but she'll be heading back. And so the reason we're all going through a little bit of sadness right now is because my husband passed away in the fall. And it was so jarring for us, although he was sick. He was quite sick. And just to be without him has been such a shocking change. And so I thought, after he died, I took a week for bereavement. And I stayed home, and it was very quiet. I was here by myself. My daughter had gone back to London, and I prayed and I rested and I read spiritual writings. And I just thought, it might be time for me right now to retire. Although I don't see it being a permanent retirement. I mean, I see, because I've had several different jobs and different careers. I had a career in healthcare while I was actually teaching at the SEM at night, and then I joined the seminary. I did a career in started as consulting business because I worked in the field of addiction medicine and mental health. And so my career was working at a mental health hospital. I built the program I saw the need, because I had always worked in pharmaceuticals with physicians. So I saw the need for the help. And I created a business that we went out and educated physicians across 5 states. And we educated them in how to identify addiction in my patient population and how to treat it. And so that's what I did for my full-time job before I joined the seminary. And then I just went full-time with the seminary, which I loved because I had been there as a student and I knew I wanted to come back and work there.
So are you headed to London?
I am. We're headed to London I may actually go back with her in the summer when she goes back, because Simali's on a tourist visa. So she has to go back every 3 months. And so I'm going to go back with her, and then she's planning her wedding. So she'll get married there. And so that's what we're up to. That's our family adventure.
Wonderful. So we've covered quite a bit of territory of the book. I know there was one thing I wanted to mention because for so many people, the scandal focused on children. And I did notice in your writings that one of the things in formation is that if there is a in formation if it's found that if there is a sexual interest in children, that a seminarian is automatically dismissed. Whereas normal sort of sexual problems, it's the assumption, well, maybe we can work with this person. With children, attraction to children, it's assumed that that's way too deep a pathology to be working with in the seminary. So I wanted to bring that out for our listeners here.
Yes.
Because again, going back to if a seminarian is not capable of marriage, then he's not capable, he shouldn't be ordained. During the sex abuse scandal, I had many, especially non-Catholics, but some Catholics as well, come to me and say, well, if the priest had been married, he wouldn't have abused a child. And my reaction to that was, well, who do you want him married to? Because I don't want to be married to him. I don't want my daughters married to him if he's interested in children. Like, he could have gone down the street and had sex with a woman, or someone in the parish, but he chose a child. Yeah. So that's a different form of sexual problems that is extremely disordered. And so we don't want to work with that.
No.
Because that person would not be capable of marriage either, right. Proper marriage. And they would have most likely abused, if they had children, they would abuse their children.
Yes.
Also, I wanted to bring out that comes out is that a lot of people think, well, it's celibacy is the problem to begin with.
No.
But we've seen the sexual abuse issues in the non-celibate married ministry of other denominations.
Yes.
And certainly other organizations. So it's not the celibacy itself, it's the formation issues and sometimes deep psychological disorders.
Absolutely.
Of the human person, that some of which can be weeded out, but some which we recognize cannot be weeded out. Or if they can, it's not the job of the church in seminary formation to do that level of weeding.
That's right.
And
that's such a risk. I mean, that particular disorder is such a risk. It has to be weeded out because the chances of something like that happening is.
And again, with homosexuality, where it's deep-seated, not just that it's been a passing phase, when you were 16, but it's a continued thing. To understand, again, the disorder of it, in the sense that this person would not be capable of marriage.
Right, of course.
So, so sometimes people say, well, this discriminates against homosexuals, but we would say the same thing of a heterosexual. If you're not capable of marriage, it doesn't really matter which you are. You got to be capable of marriage in order to be considered for ordination. And I think that's a concept that's really come out of John Paul II's theology of the body. Again, that these are two sides of the same coin: marriage and the celibate priesthood, and the virginal religious life for women. They're one. They form a whole. They form one solid aspect of the church, and so it's that understanding is important in seminary formation and in seminary weeding out, because these are going to be our shepherds.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we've seen the disaster of having bad shepherds for the sheep,
And it's the gift, as John Paul II would say, the gift of total self-giving that you give in your priesthood and your family life.
Right. And you have to be capable of that.
That's right.
Like we said, sometimes that can be formed in seminary formation. A person may not, you don't come in with the whole package, but it can be formed. But for some people, there's been, for whatever reason, too much damage done in childhood, in their personality, that it can't be formed, at least not it may be formed eventually throughout their life, but it can't be formed during, the years of seminary formation. Because we do want our seminary, our priests, to be a gift to the church.
Definitely.
It's a difficult culture. We live in a culture of death, where the light of the church is so important. having good, holy, humble priests, educated priests. You know, my mother was Catholic. And when she was in her 20s, I'm a convert to Catholicism. But when my mother was in her 20s, she went to her priest. She had 3 questions. I'd love to know what those questions were now. I'm sure I could answer them in 5 minutes, whatever they were, you know. But she had 3 questions, and she went to her priest, and he said to her, "You don't ask questions, you just believe." And she left the church. She thought it was a stupid, obviously it was a stupid church that couldn't answer simple questions. My guess was, if I were to guess, that one of them had to do with contraception.
Sure.
My guess is, which I could answer, you know, but I don't know what, oh gosh, on the other side, I'm going to answer.
I know. It was so long ago. I know. And you feel bad for her, I'm sure.
Yeah, but just that little example of, there was someone, an uneducated priest who couldn't answer her questions, whether they were moral questions or theological questions. He couldn't answer them. And so his answer was, "You just believe," you know, like we're not, you know, instead of, you know, the intellect is part of faith, you know, and the intellect is part of the intellectual life, can be part of our faith life.
Absolutely. And so, again, back to our seminary, St. Charles Borromeo, how we have so many diocese bishops that send into our seminary. That is another evidence that we do form them well, that the bishops are pleased with that, and that they have confidence. They have confidence in our formators, in our professors, in the rectors, I mean, in the environment itself, that they're in a safe, very well intentioned seminary where they're being formed for others in the model of Christ. And, you know, the other thing about the topics with the clerical sexual misconduct, my motivation in even writing the first one was, Christ is the model, the perfect model of purity and self-gift, and how pornography and sexual attraction and abuse just attack that beautiful model of purity and self-gift. And we're made in the image and likeness of Christ, and the priest is working in image and likeness of Christ, with Christ, through Christ. And that's the model. And so that was my motivator. That was my motivator to write that first article, for when we just had like a little, we were each able to put forth a little synopsis of what the book might be, the first book. And so Inside the Vatican did some articles for us, and just talking about so what we did in the first book, Robert and I, Professor Fastiggi, we went through the early church documents. And that first book, let me get that up here. Clerical Sexual Misconduct and Interdisciplinary Analysis, as I told you, covers every possible area.
It does.
But it does, in terms of research. But it is, Jeff Meares wrote in his review that it was so deeply researched, which is good. It has so many resources. But in terms of what the chapter that Robert and I did, it was for the church documents. How far back does the church talk about this purity, this self-gift of purity and entering into the priesthood? And so that's what we went with, all the original documents, so that but the times may change and the influences may become more forceful, but this does not change. And so that's why we just relied on even the ancient documents. And
I think sadly, we're in this culture that equates purity with boredom and no fun I want to have fun.
Right.
And yet all of this fun that people are having is leaving them deeply unhappy, deeply sorrowful, deeply hurt by themselves, hurting other people, being hurt by other people, devastated relationships, marriages, fathers leaving, children, curled up because dad is gone, crying. I've seen it. Just this broken culture of sadness that we're in right now. I help run a problem pregnancy agency.
Oh, good for you.
With all kinds of sorrow there. But recently I was putting up one of our little Facebook blurbs, and I thought, well, let me go to the top 10 rock songs today and pull some lyrics from one of the songs, and use that as the little blurb for the week. And the top 10 songs were so filled with sorrow, ugliness, the lyrics, death, suicide, misery, stabbing people, killing people, hating myself, that I couldn't use any of them, of the top 10 songs in the country.
So dark.
It was just darkness and misery and unhappiness. And so, I understand that the concepts of purity sound boring to many of our listeners, even here. But if you stop for a minute and think about the deep unhappiness that's come from the fun, from trying to get rid of the boredom, that, when we talk about purity, we're really talking about joy and happiness and delight, and not hurting one another and not being hurt. And especially women, I think with Dr. Peter Klopanis really talked how the pornography is a real war on women.
Absolutely.
I grew up in a household filled with pornography from my teen years on. And so I know how devastating it was to my mother, how devastating it was to my self-image, my sisters. We lived with it. My brother, all of us lived with it, and suffered the consequences of it.
Yeah.
And so people are hurting. And so when the church talks about purity, we're really talking about happiness.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And not having a miserable life,
I do want to say something to what you were saying about these behaviors against purity is a betrayal of themselves. It's a betrayal of who they are as children of God, who they were created to be, who they are. And so as you were saying that, that's the first thing that came to my mind, that this is a betrayal of themselves. That's not who they are. And that's why it doesn't bring happiness. And that's why when you saw all the terrible effects of it as you went through the lyrics, that's so against who they are. And if they only understood that.
I love John Paul II's that pornography doesn't show too much of the human person, it shows too little.
Oh,
it's one of my favorite quotes.
He had such a wonderful way.
People are so beautiful and they deserve to be treated with love and respect. And it's really a betrayal of love. And everybody wants love.
That's right.
Sometimes in my ethics class, I'll ask the kids, which would you rather have? You could never see your family again, but you could live at Six Flags and, ride the roller coaster and all the rides for the rest of your life, but you'd never see your friends and family again. Or you could have your friends and family, but never go to Six Flags ever, and it's interesting because the kids will immediately say, I'll stick with my family.
Oh, nice. Wonderful. That's good.
Love.
Yeah.
So they immediately realize that fun has its place, and fun can enhance your life if you're properly loved.
Yes. Oh, beautiful.
But if you're not properly loved, then fun is not fun at all.
That's right.
In fact, fun can be like when you lose a loved one, it's not even fun to have fun because your loved one's not there to have the fun with you. Nobody wants, like when you lost your husband, I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
even sitting and having a candy bar isn't fun.
exactly.
In fact, it can also even make you more miserable because you've lost love. And so what we want is love. And then once we have love in its proper place, then we can have fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's right.
But fun all by itself is an empty ugliness.
That's right. And Christ wants us to be joyful, and he wants to join us in that joy. He brings us that joy. He stays with us through that joy, and he's with us in our sadness. And I just am so grateful to have prayer and to be able to reflect on our marriage and reflect with the wonderful life that we've had together. So it's a big adjustment, but many, many people go through it. So it's prayer is very helpful.
And so we want our seminaries to be able to formate our young priests so that they can help us in family life, and they can help us in the single life, and they can be a true gift, to the church. So our seminary formation is radically important. I thank you for writing the chapters that you've written.
Thank you, Kiki.
I think the books are available through En route and through Amazon.
Yes.
So highly recommended for especially those working in formation, but also for those out there who are listening today who, have survived the sexual abuse scandal, but would like to understand it better and understand how we can get ourselves to move forward out of this place to a better world. Highly recommend both books. I've read all of the first one and some of the second one. And there will be more interviews on the chapters coming up.
Yes, and the second.
Great. Thank
you.
And
And so I would just like to thank Jane Adolphe, the editor, who so brilliantly was inspired to do this and brilliantly pulled together. She has so many human resources in all of us, right, Kiki? And she brought everyone together. And the complementarity of the second book is that each was written by a man and a woman. And that's it. It's just she is very, very good and blessed at what she does. The Lord inspires her. He's given her a great background in law and in theology and education. And so she really is a very fine editor and knows how to do a job well done.
And if you're here at the Catholic Bookworm and you go back, I think it's maybe about 10 interviews back, there is an interview with Jane and Robert. So take a look at that when you get a chance. And there's, like I said, there'll be more interviews coming up with other authors of the other chapters.
Very good.
When Sebastian first asked me to take this on, I said, no, I don't want to go there. It's just all too awful and painful. So he said, well, pray about it. And so here I am. And it's been an education. Some of it has been painful to read. But there has been light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm very blessed to be here and to be with authors like Suzanne Mulrain today. So I thank you.
Thank you.
And I recommend the books to anyone who's been in any way touched by the scandal, who would like to help figure it out and move forward in faith, in grace. Yeah. Could you end us with a prayer?
I would be happy to. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Jesus and Mary, we thank you very much for your presence and your blessings on this conversation. And we pray that many hearts were touched and many hearts were healed. And I thank Kiki and Sebastian for this opportunity. And may you bless them abundantly. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great day, and we'll stay in touch.
Thank you, Kiki. God bless you.
Enjoy London, and may your heart be healed slowly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Difficult transitions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. It was a pleasure. It was really a pleasure today. Thank you.
Thank you.